numbers keep going up, which is great. Okay. Okay, we can get started, because then I get questions. Oh, do you have the recording? I missed it. So I'm like, yeah, it's live. It's on our YouTube. Go and watch it. So good morning, everyone. And thank you so much for joining us, especially if you're in the West Coast, like Michael here at 7 a.m. So thank you. We're doing it at 10 a.m. so we can capture everyone, especially in Europe. Maria is joining us from Greece, which is, I believe, 5 p.m. right now. So it's super cool. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. If we've never met before, and I know that there are some new names on the list. So I'm Nama Blonder. I'm an architect and urban planner. I am based in downtown Toronto. So it's 10 a.m. here, and I think, I don't know, temperature, it's like the warmest day of the week so far, around 0 degrees. Yes. But it was cold. It was very cold this week. And we've been doing those roundtables with, different topic every month, but with one rule. The projects and the speakers could be from Toronto, but the projects are not based in Toronto. So we could really bring the best ideas and the best case studies, so we could learn with, the challenges that Toronto is facing, as so many other big cities are facing the same challenges. So today is the topic of delivery, the delivery of affordable housing. We call it mechanism or systems, because you'll see these are 3 completely different systems. It's not just, covering 3 deeply affordable housing projects, or, because affordability is a spectrum, and it's a pretty wide range of possibilities that we need to address. So with that, thank you very much for joining us. We're going to hear 3 projects from Vienna, Portland, and Charlotte. So let's get started. Maria, over to you.
Yes.
From here.
Yes. Thank you for inviting me. And without further ado, let me take you to Vienna. Now, you may have heard about Vienna as the world's best case, I would say, when it comes to social housing. So in the next couple of minutes, I will be explaining how the Viennese model of social housing works, and why it is so crucial to Vienna being regularly ranked as the world's #1 in terms of livability. But before we deep dive, I would like to share with you Vienna's basic approach to becoming the world's #1. This is, on the one hand, that we want to be an affordable city, and social housing lies at the heart of Vienna's affordability strategy. So it's about quality of life that can be afforded by everybody, and not just by the few who can afford everything. Then it's about livability, meaning that we look into high quality social housing. And when we speak about social housing in Vienna, we don't speak only about a unit, a housing unit, or one building. We speak about new urban quarters that are designed from day one to provide optimum life quality. So what you see in this picture here, example given, is the new urban quarter of Lakeside, Aspern. What you see in the backdrop is social housing. What you do not see is that on some of these rooftops, there are even swimming pools, and the lake that you see here is artificial. So the idea is, and the photo has been taken from the public transport, from the metro station. So you can see that the idea is to design entire urban quarters that provide optimum life quality and community life. And then community, which means that we also focus on models of social housing that will, again, strengthen local communities. Now I would like to take us into this could not be, yes. Now all of this is based on 100 years of social housing tradition. So Vienna started with municipal housing construction as early as the early 1920s, and never stopped, actually. So the city kept producing municipal housing units, and then in parallel, after World War II, also providing subsidies for social housing. So there are two different schemes, let's put it this way. One scheme is municipally owned and the other scheme is subsidized by the city, but owned by non-for-profit corporations. So resulting in very impressive numbers. Nowadays, 62% of Vienna's population live either in municipally owned or in subsidized housing units. The city keeps creating 7,000 subsidized units approximately per year. It invests more than 500 million per year in social housing, and it has a very active land policy. Now, if we look into the model, this is a three-pillar model. First and foremost, the land needs to be affordable. So Vienna has a very active land policy, meaning not only that the city owns land and keeps also acquiring land at low prices wherever possible, that is then turned over to non-for-profit housing corporations in order to enable social housing. But it also monitors land prices and takes action. So just to give you an example, the city decided back in 2019, because of skyrocketing land prices, that we will introduce a new land use category, which is called subsidized housing, meaning that as soon as a developer plans to erect more than 150 units, automatically 2/3 by law have to be subsidized housing, which is extremely radical, unparalleled anywhere in Europe. It's the 5th year now, and it has worked, let's say, almost miracles in terms of controlling land prices. So construction is then subsidized, and then individuals who still cannot afford may receive individual grants so that they can enter the system. The financing model behind it, there is a 1% approximately tax on income of all employees collected by the national state and then allocated to the federal states. Vienna uses each and every cent of this tax revenue, which is approximately around 270 million per year, and then it adds means from its own budget. Plus, the subsidy is actually a very low interest loan that is given to non-for-profit corporations, which means, of course, that there are means that are revolving. So there is a revolving fund from paying back this loan, and all of this forms the annual budget. There is a multitude of limited profit, so actually non-profit housing corporations. It's altogether, I couldn't tell you the number right now, but operating in Vienna, for sure, more than 30, 40, perhaps 50 of them. Some of them are big players. And again, as I said, there are individual grants to applicants who still cannot afford. You can see that the model, the Viennese model, is targeting middle class. So the income limits in order to qualify for a subsidized unit are very high. And that resulting in income limits beyond 100,000 euro per year net income for a family of 4. And excuse me, not net, of course, but 100,000 again for a couple with 2 children, example. And there is a multitude of different schemes. Most of them are subsidized rent schemes. And then there is collaborative housing models. These are houses designed by the tenants themselves. Ideally or typically in this scheme, they're owning shares, but they do not own a specific unit. And in all other subsidized rent schemes, it is the difference between the different schemes is more or less a difference in the height of in the amount of the entry fee that needs to be paid, resulting in a slight variation in the monthly rent. And there is very high quality. So this is just an example of what it means in real life. There is high architectural quality. There is altogether the whole system is based on competitions. So non-for-profit housing developers with their teams of architects will compete for one parcel, for one piece of land. And if they win the competition, they will then receive the subsidy to build whatever they have, of course, competed with. The criteria are architectural quality, social inclusion, ecological sustainability, and financial sustainability. So this is an example of what it results to, and that's an excellent example for what is happening in Vienna right now. In many cases, several non-profit housing developers will not do underground garages. They will team up to do a shared overground parking facility. So, and the money that they will save, they will give back to tenants in form of other amenities. So it is not unusual to have swimming pools on the rooftop, just as an example. Now, what are the takeaways? Well, I would say, first and foremost, Vienna social housing scheme is housing for all. So 75% of the Viennese population qualify for social housing. It targets middle class, it targets practically almost everybody, so there is no stigma that goes with it. Second, it is based on limited profit developers who buy the land or lease the land very cheaply from the city of Vienna. In some cases, they may be using their own reserves, who receive the subsidy for the construction as a long-term, so 25 to 30-year horizon, long-term loan that they need to return, and who by law need to reinvest any profits that they make into social housing again. So it's a very robust system. It involves tenants actively as shareholders. So the entry fee, in a way, is a way of holding small shares in these housing cooperatives, social housing cooperatives. There is a municipal housing fund that is managing the land and also the competitions and subsidies. And last but not least, the rents reflect the real costs of construction. This is very important to know. So the rent does not orient, the height of the rent does not orient itself at the tenant's income. It is what it is. It is the result of the real costs for the land and construction. It is still very affordable. But as said, if somebody still cannot afford, they may apply for an individual grant to be able to stay there, which means that there is high transparency on how much the rent really costs and what the tenant may or may not be receiving in addition, depending on their income situation. I will leave it at that. I will say that perhaps in the end, the two takeaways, major takeaways, is that Vienna system targets middle class, and the second major takeaway is that it is a real cost rent that does not disguise again the costs of the social housing system, which is very important, I think, because in many cases, when you don't have real cost rents, you mix actually the social budget with the housing budget, ending in criticism that social housing is not sustainable financially, which is not actually the case. And this said, Thank you very much. Here's an example, by the way, of a collaborative housing model designed by the tenants themselves.
Thank you, Maria. I'm going to launch into my talk. I'm working on a much smaller scale here in the Portland, Oregon area, and I love to think about the differences of scale in this sort of housing. And I think that hopefully that this will be something you can think about the ways that some of these things are achievable in different ways. But I'm going to be focusing for this conversation about a specific reform to low density zoning that we did in Oregon and subsequently in Portland that I think has resulted in a modest success in increasing production at mostly middle income housing prices. And I'm going to talk mostly about the tactics, about the how this happened. I'll talk a little bit about what happened, what we did, and what the results have been, and why. So thanks a lot for the invitation to be here. I'm Michael Anderson with Sightline Institute. We're a regional sustainability think tank. This is our domain up in the Pacific Northwest, going across the Canadian-US border into British Columbia and up to Alaska even. We are focused on a lot of issues. I'm focused in our program on housing and transportation. And one of our key characteristics is that we think cities are good. We think they're good for the environment. We think they're good for the economy. We think they're good for society. So it really disturbs us that cities are largely illegal. This is a photo of Toronto in 1925. I would never say that we should return to every policy of the past. Among other things, I'm very glad that I can't smell this picture. But one thing I love about photos like this one is that you can see that time before we made rules about zoning, cities looked like we expect them to look, more or less. We had intense uses in the center of the city where people could meet, and a gradually sort of evolving spectrum of lower and lower intensity development as you go further and further apart. And this was not planned. This is just the way that things were gradually able to evolve. However, cities stopped being able to do this. This is a triplex in Albany. It's a small town outside of Portland that you would never know it's a triplex, but it's the practical thing to do on this lot for 100 years. And so 100 years ago, somebody built a little triplex there. The only thing you would know is that there's a mailbox. You can see the Unit A label right around the corner of that post on the front. Middle housing, as we call it here, 2 to 4 unit buildings is a bedrock of smaller cities' housing markets. It's something along the lines of 10% of the total housing stock in much of the United States and Canada. And you can see that it varies a bit by location, but this is not a new idea. It's an old idea. This is a map of Portland. This is every 2 to 4 unit building in the city of Portland. And if you look at it closely, you'll notice that there are some weird sort of duplex deserts in the city. I've made some notes of them here, and this is the place that if you know Portland, you'll recognize as the fancy parts of Portland today. They're also the first places where duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, everything else was banned back in 1924 and the subsequent years when we introduced zoning to the city of Portland. By 1959, we had gone citywide with that low density zoning. It became more and more fashionable to live in a neighborhood where you weren't allowed to build more than 1 unit on a lot. And by 2019, this is what the zoning looked like at the city level with all those yellow zones where you could not build these low density but multi-family projects. This has happened to every city basically in North America, and happened in Toronto, happened in New York. Fortunately, we can work to change this. We can allow new homes to develop at these somewhat lower costs, these somewhat higher densities. This is a duplex in my old neighborhood, a fourplex in my current neighborhood. This is an ADU in a backyard. These are a cluster of cottages. I live in a cottage cluster myself. This is a backlot home. You can see one behind the other in Massachusetts. This is a sixplex that was recently built in Portland on a lot that had previously had a one-unit structure. This is an old historic apartment building next to another, I think probably very similar to a lot of parts of Toronto. This is a part of Portland that was built around the same time that Toronto boomed in the 1900s, 1910s. This is a building we could have tomorrow if we let it. I'm going to talk here then about one tactic that worked in Oregon, state or provincial action. I could talk in a Q&A if you'd like about why I think that that's a good idea, but I'll talk about what happened and what the results have been. In 2019, we passed a law at the state level that re-legalized fourplexes. So to be specific, fourplexes were legal in all neighborhoods of cities 25,000 and up and throughout the Portland metro. We don't have the municipal consolidation you have in the Toronto area and much of Canada. So that was an important way to sort of avoid the segregation through secession from a large city was the thought. And also allowed duplexes on any lot in cities of 10,000 to 25,000. So that's sort of middle-sized city duplexes anywhere. The essential ingredient of this is Tina Kotek. She was the Speaker of the House at the time. She was the sponsor of the bill. She's now our governor, and she's had a successful political career in part based on this success. This was a policy that got her a lot of praise as she ran for higher office, in part because I think it worked out, but it would not have worked out if she had not been utterly committed to it. Leading the political coalition outside of government, nonprofit housing developers, we found were the glue that kept our coalition together and sort of let us build out from the center of a coalition. That's Madeline Kovacs is the younger woman in this photo. She was my colleague at a couple different organizations leading the political side of this effort. And here she is with Diane Lynn from Proud Ground, a community land trust in Portland. This is in part the reason the nonprofit developers were fit for it was they were already building middle housing. This is a Habitat for Humanity project. Nonprofit developers, especially on smaller scales, are looking to cut every cost, and so they have every incentive to make the zoning efficient and low cost. One of the political lessons we learned was that we expected 3 and 4 units to be sort of a negotiating tactic, and then we'd settle for lower counts. But when we got to the politics, we found out that actually the people who hated this idea were just as upset about duplexes, and the people who liked it were more excited about lower home prices, and you can get lower home prices with higher unit counts. So it turns out that that was not the problem we thought it would be. The whole thing would not have happened, would not have worked without a lot of relationships built over time. This is Bandana Shrestha of AARP leading a walking tour of a historic Portland neighborhood. She got religion on middle housing several years before we kicked the campaign off in earnest, and was one of many people who was just as an individual essential to legitimizing this concept that was unfamiliar to a lot of people. Normal people don't usually think about zoning. The heart of the people sort of steering the campaign were, interestingly, in Portland anyway, environmental groups, funded mostly by foundations interested in housing affordability and individual donors, and was built on lots of face-to-face interactions to start out with in Portland. From 2016 to 2019, Madeline spoke with 3,000 Portlanders, and a few other folks, including me, were part of that as well. And we gradually built a phone email list of 1,200 housing supporters that became the core of our political network. One thing that we saw that worked, that was really important to getting this done, was for the government to be putting out reports that were earnestly done, that we could have shared facts around. This is a map of the displacement rate, the projected displacement effect. And the net effect they calculated was that there was some increased displacement in some neighborhoods of this change, and the aggregate effect was that it was a reduced displacement on lower income tenants, both citywide and in a majority of areas at high gentrification risk. That did not eliminate the problem of talking about this complicated issue, but it did give us all something to talk about and some basic assumptions to agree on. And we wouldn't have been able to do it without that analysis from a trusted authority, the city. The key politically to getting this done in the end in Portland was for the folks who were opposed to this reform because it didn't do enough for below market housing to get together with the people who were for this reform because it was an incremental reduction in market prices to say, we're not going to stop at 4 units, we'll go to 6 with affordability. And somehow that had been completely invisible to us before we had started talking. It was seen as completely beyond the pale to even go to 4. And so we couldn't think bigger and get to 6. But once we did, we were able to unlock this coalition that was able to win. It built a bunch of unexpected alliances. I won't run through them here, but you can see these slides later. This is our opposition. This is Jane making a gesture at a public hearing about the structure that she actually it was a giant 1-unit structure that had already been built next to her house, and she was upset about this. Our point was, yes, that's the current zoning that created this giant 1-unit structure. We're not going to change that. A few messaging lessons I'll run through here that were really important to us. Always talk about what you're getting, not what you're losing. So we talked about re-legalizing middle housing, not ending single family zoning. We didn't use the word density. Present company forgiven. We talked about proximity instead. We also represented ourselves as being opposed to giant oneplexes. We called them McMansions. We used the word McMansion over and over again to, I think, peel off a group of folks who were sympathetic to housing and unsympathetic to massive inequality. And by signaling that, like, we too have a problem with that massive inequality, we were able to talk to more people about this goal. And I think it's also very important to talk about your community's specific history, if you can. We used the year 1924 as the introduction of these bans on low density, lower cost homes. And the year 1959 is the year that went citywide. Talked about that over and over again. Finally, on messaging, it is very, very important for people to see photos, as we saw from Vienna, of what you're getting, of what the promise is. So it's very important to have those available. This is a free photo library that we've got. Sightline has made available for anybody who wants it for similar campaigns on Flickr. This is Steve Messinetti from Habitat. He's a terrific messenger to have been quoted in the major public radio story about it. I was overjoyed that I was not quoted in this story. I instead convinced them to talk to him. These are some, we've got a series of lessons. I will not run through it right now, but if you're interested in things like this, we have a memo, this URL. You can read the thing we circulated to legislators when this bill was introduced. And you can also sign up for other things from Sightline at this link. I will run through a few outcomes in a minute for the moment to look at the party split. It's important to call attention in the American context to the fact that we could not have done this just with Democratic votes. We needed, in both the House and Senate at the state level, bipartisan coordination to get this done. It was largely an alliance of the city and rural areas, and especially tourist areas, against suburban areas. We got about half of suburban Democrats. We got no suburban Republicans. We got all but one urban Democrat, and we got a number of rural Republicans. I don't know how that politics correlates, but that was this formula here. Portland in 2020 passed a local version that implemented that state version. So many of these images are the result of that local code. One of the things we discovered, as I mentioned, was that if you go to 6 units per lot, it greatly reduces the amount of public money that needs to be spent per home. And so this is what it would take to subsidize a 1-plex into affordability, a 4-plex into affordability, a 6-plex, and an 8-plex. It's as if you're writing a check for affordable housing just by allowing that zoning to be used, except it doesn't cost the public anything at all beyond what you see there. So that was the compromise, and then it unlocked at the state level a wave of changes that further reduced barriers to housing, new density bonuses, lot splits. Today in Portland, you will see lots that would have previously been developed like this, looking more like this, and then eventually like this, or this. They're going into places disproportionately near larger corridors and closer to commerce, I would say. You can see it scattered somewhat throughout the city here, but this is the first year of housing production, and it was disproportionately likely to be closer to transit and commerce. The prices have come into, I would say, sort of a little bit more than the median Portlander can afford, which is, of course, not a solution for everybody, but it is nowhere close to the $1 million plus that it used to cost to live in a newly built home in these zones. And so you can see the previous lot sale price was $572,000 for an older home, and the price per unit now is lower than the price used to purchase one lot now for 4 units in this neighborhood. I'll close by talking about this fellow, Eric. He was a builder of these giant oneplexes, and he didn't really realize that he didn't like his job. He came into this, joined the advisory committee, said, my goal is to kill this program. I hate that they're going to change the zoning here and steer me away from this business. And then while sitting there on these panels, he realized, no, wait, I could make this work. I could build these lower cost homes, and my kids could actually afford to buy them, maybe. So he told me that he was now selling, he had 20 projects in the pipeline, and he was selling to people he would have never thought that he could sell to before, talking to school teachers, restaurant managers, folks that made him feel good to work with. I think as we think about these policies, it is important to remember that change comes to neighborhoods no matter what. This is a comment from a woman on the Oregon bill that really has stuck with me. She wrote in, I do not like the changes that have happened in my neighborhood. When I moved into my home 18 years ago, I moved to a block filled with young families. It's hard to picture now, but there was a time when our neighborhood was affordable for working class people. I think those are the stakes. Change is coming one way or another to our cities when they are growing, when money is coming into them. It's our choice to say what happens to it. Thanks so much. I'll pass things over to Simca.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me. I'm going to be pretty short and sweet, and feel very honored to go after Maria and Michael, who are working on some very innovative and exciting projects. My name is Simcha Ward. I live here in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm a director of development at Crescent Communities, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about public and private solutions to housing finance in Charlotte. It's a very complicated solution to a very simple problem. And hopefully that will make sense when I speak to it. So I'm a director of development at Crescent Communities. We are not an affordable housing developer. We are market rate multifamily throughout the Sunbelt states in the United States. I specifically work on market and luxury product in Nashville and Charlotte. We're multidisciplinary in that we do residential, office, single family, industrial, life science, you name it, we do it. I don't have a dog in this hunt other than as an interested citizen and someone that's had some experience working in this sector previously. But I spoke with Naama about it a few weeks ago, and she suggested that we might have some things going on in Charlotte that others would benefit from. So the problem is pretty simple. We're not building enough housing, full stop. And more importantly, the housing that we are building is not really addressing those most in need or giving them opportunities for social advancement. Charlotte's grown by 10% over the last year from 2.5 to 2.75 million people. We've had 35% GDP growth over the last 5 years. The city is growing like crazy, and the amount of money that's coming in and being produced keeps going up and up and up. That's reflected in our changing skyline. These two pictures are dated. We built 135,000 new units of housing in the last 5 years, and the city is just transforming in front of our eyes with new towers popping up all over the place. Unfortunately, we're seeing all that new housing, and for the first time, we're at a kind of surplus with respect to new housing units being built relative to demand. That's kind of making rent growth slow down for the first time in quite a while. But as you can see from this chart, the top line is overall housing units, the second line is multifamily units, and the bottom line is LIHTC units. LIHTC is the predominant way that affordable housing gets built in America. It's driven by bond allocations and 9% tax credit allocations, and it's essentially fixed. So even as we grow and even as housing units kind of catch up to demand, housing that's purposely built to be affordable is just kind of remaining flat. And that's creating a huge challenge in a growing city like Charlotte. The other aspect of LIHTC is that it's got a considerable amount of red tape and competition, and it really creates very specific buckets of population served. This slide is a little bit old, but it used to be that essentially most low-income housing tax credit developments were built to serve 60% of area median income or 40% with very specific tranches, and that every unit in the building was a LIHTC unit. So everyone, essentially what we were doing is putting all folks of the same economic means in the same building and expecting different outcomes with respect to social mobility. That changed a few years ago with income averaging, where we've now got that rather than all units being at 60%, you can blend the units so that we've got some that are more deeply affordable and some that are targeted at 80% of area median income. But that's still below middle and essentially still creates entrenched communities of poverty and lack of opportunities for social mobility. And you kind of add that housing policy on top of a geography of, that's a result of segregation policies and zoning policies. And what you get is kind of entrenched poverty. In Charlotte, we've got what we call the crescent and the wedge, or the arc and the wedge. The area in kind of turquoise at the bottom is what I'll call the preferred quarter of the city, the fancy parts, the luxury parts. And they're wrapped around by areas that just don't have the same income levels, job opportunities, housing quality, commercial opportunities, etc. And you end up in just generational cycles of folks that don't have the upward mobility that they deserve. And kind of that's how we get to the challenge here. Charlotte has been ranked 50th of the largest 50 cities in America for economic mobility. That means that if you're a child born into poverty, you're least likely of any city in America to get out of it. We've got, all the metrics here are bad with respect to finding housing for cost burden families, all the things you'd expect with respect to racial segregation and otherwise. And this stinks. We're in one of the most booming cities in the country, and yet we're not finding opportunities for folks to improve their economic means through all that growth. That's pretty awful. So the solution is to have a big typo on your slide, but the solution is public and private gap financing and low-cost land too. Charlotte has a housing trust fund that was started in 2002. It's already had $250 million of bonds approved by the city to fund affordable housing. In the first 20 years, it created 10,000 units of new and rehab housing and almost 1,000 beds for folks that are experiencing homelessness. What's important about this slide to note is if you look at the lower left, there's two things. What we're starting to see with this program is an outsized creation of units at 30% of area median income. In order to qualify for the Housing Trust Fund, you need to set aside units for those most in need. I believe it's 20% of the total minimum. That is creating housing opportunities for folks at the lowest end of our income spectrum, and that's a huge improvement. The challenge that you're seeing, if you look at the map on the right, is that the predominant amount of that housing is being created in the ARC. It's not in the wedge. You see City Council District 6 and 7 have just a handful of dots in them, and the remainder are kind of spread around in that ARC above. So Housing Trust Fund, great program, creating a lot more housing targeted at folks at the lower end of the income spectrum, but it's still not really penetrating councils District 6 and 7, where land is very expensive and opposition is high. So the solution to that has been the introduction of the Charlotte Housing Opportunity Investment Fund. And it's a layered capital stack that includes private grants, equity, and loans running through that investment fund, the Housing Trust Fund, low-cost land below it, housing vouchers from the Housing Authority that provide opportunities for folks at the lowest end of the income spectrum to live in these buildings. And we're layering those sources on top of each other to create very, very interesting housing developments that serve folks from below 30% of area median income to above 100%. And the investors in the Charlotte Housing Opportunity Fund are all for-profit entities. You've got the major banks that are located here. You do have some foundation funding that's kind of administering it, but you've got the major banks, the major hospitals, the energy company, everyone coming together to say, we've got to put private capital to work to start to solve the housing issue that we're creating here. And so this funding is going for new construction, rehabilitation projects throughout the city. Varick on 7th, I'm going to touch on in just a moment, but this is just a representative sample. And I wish that we were like Vienna and had that design quality, but we're just not seeing that in Charlotte today, where these are very market-driven developments. And so the impact of Charlotte Housing Opportunity Investment Fund has been an additional 1,000 units of housing created over a 3-year period, predominantly served to households below 80% of area median income, and a 7x leverage. So $26 million of Charlotte Housing Opportunity Investment Fund creating over $160 million of development. And trust me, that $160 million is a light number. It's definitely more than that once it's all said and done. So that small investment is not small, but that modest investment is unlocking all of these opportunities. I highlighted Choif's 4% LIHTC next to Varick on 7th because that's actually not accurate. Varick on 7th does not use any low-income housing tax credits. It's funded from other sources, and what it's allowing is for a truly mixed income inclusive community to be developed right adjacent to transit, right in the heart of Charlotte, where everything else that's being built is essentially the kind of luxury apartments that I do as my day job. So Varick on 7th is 105 total units. It serves households all the way from 30% up to 120% of area median income. And from the interior and exterior quality, if I didn't tell you, you would have no idea that this was the type of affordable housing that we might have saw in some other images. It looks and competes with market rate housing. And it was made possible through a very layered capital stack, low cost land from the church that owns the land, shared parking with the church that owns the land, below market construction debt from a fund set up specifically to incentivize the growth of Black and minority development firms, subordinate debt from the Charlotte Housing Opportunity Investment Fund, gap financing from the Housing Trust Fund, and then a permanent debt commitment from Barings, which is a large financial institution. So it took all those pieces to make this one small mixed income property possible. Another development that I want to just touch on at a very high level is called Aldersgate Apartments. This is a 236 unit mixed income community. Aldersgate is a community for elders in East Charlotte. It has traditionally been a very expensive retirement community for folks to live in. They had excess property on their front end and wanted to be more inclusive to the community overall. So the development is structured in 3 pieces. There is a 100-unit market rate building that is for 55 and up. There is a 100-unit LIHTC building that is for folks earning 30 to 80% of area median income. And there are 36 cottage residences that are affordable for families deeply targeted from 30 to 60%. That deal required the land from Aldersgate, investments from Impact Capital like Bank of America and others, and preferred equity from our organization to make all the pieces fit together and have the market rate housing on this site and the low-cost land from the retirement community balance out and create a truly multi-generational and mixed income community. So I will leave it at that. And thank you, Nama, for including me, and Maria and Michael for your fantastic presentations.
Thank you. That was absolutely fantastic. And you know what? For each of you, I actually saw how it is applicable in Toronto. It's really impressive. Okay, we have some questions. Michael, I know you replied, you typed your answer. Hopefully everyone could see the answer. I'm not sure how Zoom works if that answer was is publicly available, but I will let you answer that. I can't see the question anymore, but Maria, there are 4 questions for you in the meantime, and I'm sure there will be some questions for Simca as well. If not, I do. But Maria, let's start with you. So wait, let me change the settings. So perfect. Okay. Can you please clarify if these new neighborhoods are mixed income, mixed communities, or just social housing? It's not clear based on the presentation. I wanted to mention that almost 2 years ago, I had a webinar with Maria, which was fantastic. It was just Maria. And in June, I had less than 48 hours in Vienna. The first thing I did, with the kids, we took the subway to see that new neighborhood. So if anyone has, it's at the end of the line, at the end of a subway line. If anyone has an opportunity to go and visit, it's absolutely stunning. I know the answer. It is mixed income. You have it's a truly diverse demographics, and it's so beautiful to see that you can't spot which one is the social housing or not. But Maria, I'll let you answer.
Yes, well, thanks for the roses, Nama. And yeah, that's true. Well, social housing is at the heart of everything, as I said, as a strategy. But of course, new urban quotas are mixed income and mixed uses, by the way. So you can imagine that it works this way, that you may have buildings where you have partially free market housing units and then the majority subsidized housing. You may have buildings where you have only free market, and then you may have buildings where you have only subsidized. Altogether, it results in approximately at least 50% social housing in a new area, or as I said, up to 75%. And excuse me, that's not true, 66%. And the reason why is because you can, if you're a developer, you can always negotiate that you may be participating in the costs or the construction of other amenities for the common good, and you may then reduce the percentage of subsidized housing down to 50% plus 1 unit. But it can never go below that by law, which now means that you may have, example given, developers that will be doing schools, and they will be constructing or participating in the construction of new parks, just to give you an example. Or they may be introducing innovative economic development, businesses solutions. Because a new urban quota, and if we say that it's not only mixed income, but it's also mixed use, means, of course, that you need to look also into how do you manage to have offices and shops and everything people need for everyday life from day one, right? And it is economically sustainable. So to make a long story short, the answer is yes, it is mixed income.
Simka, question for you. Who initiated the fund? Was it by the city? And how was the process of getting those major players on board?
Well, as said, Vienna system.
Sorry, Maria, the question was for Simka, but no, because the question was specifically about the fund that Simka mentioned. But happy to learn from Vienna after that as well. Simka, you're muted. Yes, go ahead.
I wish I could answer your question. I wasn't involved in the creation of the fund. I was only involved in the competitive process for securing funds from it. But to me, it's pretty clear that we've got a challenge in Charlotte, that we're growing at the rate that we are. And I think all the organizations are recognizing that we've got workforce development issues without providing that housing. I think, not to be too negative, but our financial system is set up so that banks have what's called CRA, Community Reinvestment Act requirements, that they've got to fund certain impact dollars in communities where they have deposits. And because many of those banks are headquartered or had main offices in Charlotte, it's an obvious place for them to go and allocate those. So I want to say it's from the goodness of their heart that the banks started to put the money into this impact place, but it's also to meet their regulatory requirements under CRA, would be my perspective.
Maria, is there anything that you would like to add that you wanted to say?
Well, I just didn't want to, end up using all of our time, but in our case, because I said the system in Vienna is historical, the fund, I couldn't tell you now when it was created. It must have been created sometime around the 80s, most probably. But what is, I think, very important and a takeaway for anybody who is looking into, these strategies is that it makes sense to have one agency, one place that manages the land on the one hand and manages subsidies on the other hand. And there is an excellent example from Germany, the small city of Tübingen, that actually decided to create such a fund in the beginning of the millennium. So somewhere around, 99, 2000, and started with as little as approximately, I think, 4 million euro. And because the fund is revolving, right? Because you have these subsidies as loans, and you have then money returning. In the meantime, the fund is at about 20 million, which is the proof that this is a robust business case.
Our webinar should come to an end, just to be respectful of everyone's time. I see a question here saying how we could ever convince Toronto-based developers to cap the profit in a way that you did in Vienna. I just want to add that you also really, in the Viennese model, you also decrease the risk by a lot. You basically take the risk out of the equation. So it's not just coming to developers and saying, hey, cap your, because no one here with a 5% return on investment, the project will never continue. But because developers here carry a major risk, and look around you, 2023. So I would like to thank Maria, Michael, and Simcha for joining me. It was absolutely fascinating 50 minutes. Thank you very much. And have a wonderful morning, evening, and rest of the day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.